Members. As stated, I'm Gwen Griffin here today representing the Texas Space Commission. I'm also the founder and CEO of Griffin Communications Group, a 27-year-old Texas small business. As a native Texan and executive in the space industry, I'm honored to serve as the first chair of the Texas Space Commission. Thank you for the invitation to provide an update on the activities and accomplishments of the Texas Space Commission, one of your newest state agencies. The Commission and the Texas Aerospace Research and Space Economy Consortium, otherwise known as TARSEC, much easier to say, were created in the last legislative session with the approval of House Bill 3447. Our defined goal is to promote innovation in the field of space operations and commercial aerospace opportunities, including the integration of space, aeronautics, and aviation industries into the Texas economy. It's the right time for Texas to focus on aerospace. The global space economy is rapidly evolving and growing from a predominantly government-led to commercially led ecosystem and is expected to be worth $1.8 trillion by 2035. So why is space important to us all? We go to space for Earth and humanity. Research resulting in life-saving medications like Keytruda are being developed today on the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. We must ensure there's no gap in the transition from the ISS, as we call it, to the commercially owned space station to continue this work after 2030. We need to establish a permanent presence on the moon. Resources that can benefit our lives, such as helium-3, are abundant on the lunar surface. It's very rare here on Earth. We need to learn how to mine them and bring them back to Earth for the benefit of humanity. And space has become a matter of national security, a big matter of national security. The importance of maintaining U.S. global leadership in space is imperative. Imagine the consequences of an adversarial nation taking out our national security satellites or our emergency communication systems. It would cripple our nation and our freedom. So thank you for creating the Space Commission so Texas can impact the nation as we do in many other industries. I'm hopeful that my remarks and the two-page summary that you've been provided, I hope you have that. Okay, great. Demonstrate the work in delivering on the Commission's stated purpose over the past 11 months. I'd like to provide a quick overview of the organizational structure. As you may know, the Space Commission is governed by a 9-member board of directors, and our advisory board, TARSEC, is governed by a 9-member executive committee. Both entities were appointed last March at an event with Governor Abbott and Dr. Greg Bonin at NASA's Johnson Space Center. The board of the Space Commission consists of 3 individuals appointed by the governor, 3 by the lieutenant governor, and 3 by the House Speaker. For the executive committee of TARSEC, 2 are appointed by the governor, 2 by the lieutenant governor, and 2 by the House Speaker, as well as a designee for the chancellors of the UT system, the Texas A&M system, and the president of Rice University. So as you can see in the handout, I'm working with some of the best leaders in the overall space ecosystem and industry. We've made a lot of progress in a brief period of time. Since the board appointments were announced last March, we've held 11 open meetings. We hired Norman Garza Jr. as our executive director on July 1st, 2024, followed by our Chief Compliance Officer, Aaron Chancellor, and Deputy Executive Director, Blake Calvert, in the August timeframe. I'm pleased they're here with me today. They've worked quickly and thoughtfully to bring an additional team together to focus on our grant program and administer the day-to-day operations of the Commission. As outlined in statute, the primary focus of the board and staff has been to establish the Space Exploration and Aeronautics Research Fund, or SURF grant program, with the $150 million approved through House Bill 1 in 2023. We really weren't sure what the demand would be like for grants to the Texas Space Commission and what that signal would look like, and it has certainly far exceeded our expectations. We opened our grant submission period in mid-September, and in 4 months we closed it after funding requests dwarfed the $150 million allotted to the Commission. In that short time frame, we received 281 applications with funding requests totaling $3.4 billion. So you can see at the breakdown at the top of the second page the categories of applicants and what that looks like. To describe this response as enthusiastic is perhaps an understatement, and one that I was thrilled to see. To ensure proper compliance and state guidelines, as well as the administrative rules that were adopted by the board, our staff has worked tirelessly, I mean tirelessly, to conduct the due diligence and background research for each of the applications before presenting it to non-conflicted board members for review and evaluation. So January marked our first open meeting to consider the approval of SURF grant applications, in which $21.5 million was approved by the board for 4 SURF grant awards. At the most recent open meeting in February, we approved $47.7 million for 5 additional awards. The Commission staff is now working closely with these entities to enter into a contract agreement for these reimbursable funds. We now have approximately $80.8 million remaining for additional grant awards, and we intend to consider approval of more awards later this month in our next open meeting. So I'd like to mention that because the initial $150 million was invested in the Treasury pool, we've earned approximately $10.2 million in interest to date, which has been credited back to the fund. It allows us to cover all of our operating expenses for the Commission out of earnings versus grant funds. These earnings will actually allow us multiple years of operating expenses. It's the board's intent to award the full $150 million in grants to private and public businesses, nonprofit and governmental entities, including institutes of higher education, for the purpose of advancing space exploration, research, and aeronautics. We're at a pivotal point and moment in strengthening and accelerating the Texas space economy across industry sectors as well as across the state geographically. If you note in the second handout, it's remarkable to me that in the past 8 days, just 8 days, a little over a week, the commercial space companies in Texas have led the nation and the world in significant space milestones and advancements. From their launch site 1 in Van Horn, Texas, a Blue Origin team successfully launched their 10th crew of individuals on their New Shepard suborbital rocket to rapidly increase the number of humans to experience the overview effect of seeing Earth, our home, from space. Thanks to Blue Origin, more than 52 astronauts have now flown to space from Texas soil in the past 4 years. Suborbital flight has also become a valuable test bed for NASA, commercial companies, and academia to conduct research in space at a much lower cost than orbital flight. The next day, last Wednesday, just last week, Intuitive Machines, a commercial company headquartered at the Houston Spaceport, launched its second robotic lander, Athena, to the moon. Addie, as she's fondly called by the IM team, is on track to touch down on the south pole of the lunar surface tomorrow morning. So watch the news if you have a chance. The IM-2 mission aims to locate and analyze water ice deposits, among other science payloads from commercial companies. How we utilize the moon will help humanity here on Earth. Just 4 days later, early Sunday morning, the mission control team at Cedar Park-based Firefly Aerospace absolutely nailed a soft landing of their robotic Blue Ghost lander on the moon's surface as we celebrated Texas Independence Day. This commercial mission will allow scientific experiments to study lunar dust and regolith properties, which can provide valuable resources here at home. Also, tomorrow, SpaceX is targeting to conduct its 8th flight of Starship, the world's largest rocket, not just the U.S.'s largest rocket, from its headquarters in Boca Chica. The mission will further evaluate the performance of full reusable launch systems for missions to Earth's orbit, the moon, and onto Mars. This is truly unprecedented. Seriously, never before has this much progress and activity occurred in unison. And every one of these missions were based here in Texas, with commercial space companies leading the way and NASA as a federal agency becoming a commercial customer, or a customer, if you will. And this is just a glimpse of what's happening in space here in Texas. There's hundreds of space-focused entities across the Lone Star State developing new technologies and reaching key milestones every day. And through your trust in the Space Commission, we are now doing our part to enable rapid industry growth and success. I've been amazed at how many states and organizations are tracking the creation and the work of the Texas Space Commission and our SURF grant program. Longtime colleagues and national leaders are applauding our efforts and commitment to space. Thank you for that. 3 weeks ago, Governor Abbott and I met with the NASA's acting administrator, Janet Petro, at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., to reinforce our commitment to the emerging space ecosystem that is critical to the success of NASA now and in the future. To remain the global leaders in human and robotic spaceflight, our federal agencies cannot do it without commercial industry partnerships. While in D.C., I also had the opportunity to meet with U.S. Representative Dr. Brian Babin and U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who each currently chair congressional committees with jurisdiction over NASA, giving further visibility to the growth of the space economy in Texas. Additionally, in the past few months, I've had the opportunity to meet with 5 U.S. Space Force generals to talk about the needs related to national security. I have to say, in each meeting, I'm reminded that space is the next warfighting domain, and that we must move quickly to prepare our nation and maintain global leadership. We cannot cede space to China. The imperative is irreversible, and our freedom is in jeopardy. Like other military branches, the Space Force wants to expand in Texas, further growing our space ecosystem. So to conclude, the state of Texas has much to be proud of when it comes to the aerospace industry and the groundbreaking activities and research being conducted here. The SURF grant program has been cited as a clear signal of Texas's investment and belief in the space industry, as well as the Space Commission's ability to connect and nurture the many moving parts of the space economy. We're ready to continue and expand this work to ensure our position as a leader in this nation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you. Representative Curry. Do you have one? Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. What a great summary. You made a comment in just a few seconds ago about the space is the next frontier when it comes to war. So I live in a district where we test all of the SpaceX motors, and believe me, they're loud and they rumble, and 20 to 30 miles away you feel them and you hear them. And we have all concluded that that's the sound of freedom.
Yes, sir.
So that's how we live with it anyway. So I would like to understand a little more in depth, if you don't mind, about why it's so important to go back to the moon, go to Mars, go higher and higher and do more and more.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question and for your interest and support that you hear that sound as a signal of freedom. One of the things I've been very touched by, I guess I would say, it's hit me hard, is visiting with these leaders of our U.S. Space Force and understanding that, I grew up, my early career was focused on the terrestrial warfighter with the Army and the Marine Corps. And so I now understand that space is where wars will be fought. It's very easy to take down a nation's capability, many nations' capabilities, and so we must protect that. Right now, low Earth orbit is of interest. There is no policy, if you will, around who owns low Earth orbit. So these are things that we really need to focus on. We need that permanent presence on a space station. It has been an incredible example of how international partnerships can be highly successful. When you go beyond that to geosynchronous orbit, where most of our satellites live today, and then onto the lunar surface and beyond to deeper space, such as Mars, I have to say that a few of the folks that I've talked to, I've learned over the last 10 to 15 years that China has gone from number 18 as a national leader or as a global leader to number 2. They're right behind us, and they're investing 7% of their resources into space exploration. They have launched a brand new, shiny International Space Station themselves, and if we're not there with our own commercial space station, we run the risk of losing that leadership to China. Onto the moon. They are preparing and putting tremendous resources, and Chinese companies are investing heavily in creating that human capability to get to the moon. It would be tough if we wanted to go to the moon one day and we were told that we don't have a right to be there. So it's a matter of national security. It's also a matter of precious resources that, as I mentioned earlier, that can be utilized for the benefit of humanity on Earth, not just Americans, but for humanity. So that's why I see exploration as an imperative, and the time is now. There are other countries that don't necessarily have our best interests at heart that are making great strides.
So I totally agree with that. When you know, one of the things that I've noticed in your grants and the grants that you've issued, the one that stands out the most would be, I mean, several of these companies are obviously funded by multi-billionaires, some of the richest men in the world. And yet, we have a $7 million grant to Blue Origins.
That's correct.
So I thought I'd ask the question do you mind describing that, how that came about and why that's important to do a grant to a billionaire?
Sure. We are so grateful to individuals who have put their own resources, billions and billions of dollars over the years of their own resources into helping our nation to advance in space. Texas is committed to space exploration. Our national leaders need us to be there. The projects that we looked at, for example, with Blue Origin, is the capability they are building. They actually have just launched for the first time their new Glenn orbital rocket named after John Glenn. That rocket will enable us to take payloads and habitat and ultimately humans to the surface of the moon. That's really important. We need to rely on commercial companies to get us to those locations. As I mentioned, NASA, for example, government-led programs cannot do that for us anymore. So what I liked, or let me rephrase that, I think what was important about the small commitment to what those individuals have put in to space for the benefit of humanity is the opportunity in the case of Blue Origin's grant award to share the data, the information, and the outcome of this capability with other companies for the betterment of the whole industry. So in that case, that was something that piqued my interest.
Okay. So this is really my final question for now anyway. I'm kind of big on asking this question. If you view the wall as a whiteboard, and in the top right-hand corner is where you put utopia, and in the bottom left-hand corner is where we are now, what is your utopia, and what can the legislature do to help support you in getting to the utopia?
Well, thank you for that question. I love that. Big picture thinker, obviously. We would like to see space companies emerge in all of your communities. So what would help us the most right now, we're not even a year at work yet, please share with your constituents that we have been established and that we are looking to support and help grow businesses, whether they do cyber technology and security, which is critical to our armed forces, as well as commercial companies. Whatever that might be, We would love to visit with them, whether it's myself, one of the other board members, one of our staff members. We will bring experts to your communities and work with those companies to see how we might help them. So please share the word, spread the word about the Texas Space Commission. I think the opportunity, I will tell you that other states are watching us very closely. Without giving a name, one of the generals that I met with said it was really imperative that Texas keep a clear signal of commitment to space, particularly for national security, and to please not reduce the amount that's being invested in the Texas Space Commission, but consider growing it as we ensure national security. So I think my utopia, or our utopia, would be to continue to grow the Space Commission's resources and to make sure that everyone in the state of Texas knows we're here and that we want to be a part of what they're doing, if it makes sense.
So why Texas? I mean, we say national security, and obviously these are major worldwide programs and beyond Mars, but is it because Texas needs to be the leader in everything in the world?
Sir, we do lead a lot. I'm a very proud Texan. We have the opportunity and the ability to serve our nation in ways that many states cannot. But I will say that, without going backwards, because I prefer to look forward, we have a rich legacy in space exploration. It was Houston, as you know, the first word spoken from the surface of the moon. We have the skill set, we have the talent, we need to develop more. Our skilled workforce needs to be replaced constantly. But Texas knows space, and we're the right state to do this and lead this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rodriguez Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague mentioned the $7 million grant to Blue Origin. There was also a $7.5 million grant to Space Exploration Technologies Corporation.
Yes,
is that
ma'am.
correct? And that's part of Elon Musk's SpaceX. And does anyone on your board have an official connection to SpaceX?
Yes.
Okay, so how does that work, giving grants to people? You said non-conflicted board members.
Yes.
Was there, what was the conflict of interest? Were they part of the vote granting themselves the grant, or how did that work?
Yes. So our Chief Compliance Officer here, Aaron Chancellor, we have set up a very robust process and procedure for how we review and evaluate the grant applications. Prior to even standing up the portal process that we each have our own area in a portal. We have disclosed any conflicts of interest that we have before the grant program even opened. And as we've moved forward in the grant application process, we do not see any of those that we are conflicted with. There are several members of the board that do have conflicts within the industry by nature of the industry. So does that answer your question?
Well, it just concerns me because it looks like you received applications, 281 applications, right? The funding request over what is that,
0.4 billion.
Okay, 3.4 billion, but almost 20% of the grants given were people on your board. And so that's concerning because you have 281 opportunities of various, maybe smaller businesses or innovators as well, but almost 20% of the funding went to people on your board when there's so much more opportunity out there. And how is it that they were not conflicted out? And you said that you disclosed that. Where was it disclosed, and what is that process?
We disclose to our Chief Compliance Officer and our Executive Director if we do have a conflict of interest. We never see those applications. We do not vote or speak about those applications if we are conflicted in our open meetings. So therefore, we're not involved in that process should we be conflicted.
Okay. So with 20% of the grants going to people within the board that is making the decision on who is going to receive those grants, I don't understand.
So we are just beginning. We've just begun our grant application process. We still have more than 100, I believe we have 113. I need to look at the data. You have it there on your paper. We have many institutes of higher education that have not even been put into our portal yet. They are being reviewed. The technical academic institutes of higher education are being reviewed, and we haven't seen those yet. Therefore, we have the $80.8 million remaining in the SURF grant fund for additional awards. We expect to make awards, additional awards to other entities. They might be a public or private business, a nonprofit entity, or a governmental entity or institute of higher education. So we're not done yet. We haven't finished our work on the $150 million that we have.
But that doesn't negate the fact that a good portion of the grant money is allocated to people on the board that are making the decisions on who to give the grants to.
It's not the majority of the dollars.
20%.
Correct.
So
So
it is about 20% of the grant money is going to members on the board that your individuals that are not conflicted out.
It's not going to the members of the board. Let me be clear on that.
Well, the companies that they are associated
The
with.
companies that we are awarding grants to are those that are leading the way and helping to expedite the needs of Texas and our nation. So I can't speak on behalf, I don't see the scoring of my fellow board members. That is held in confidence through the process. So I can't speak for anyone other than myself, ma'am.
Okay, can you share with our office the requirements on how the determination is that these individuals that are associated with these companies are not conflicted out? Like how that determination was made that they are not, that there's not a direct conflict of interest on how they are part of this determination process?
We have adopted rules, which we can make available to you
Yes,
with no
please.
problem, that help. If I had any dealing with any of the, and I do own a strategic communications firm, a very small business that works in the space industry. So that's why I personally have notified our chief compliance officer and our executive director of any conflicts that I may have. I am not even aware of those that have been put into the portal yet. I don't even know who those companies are. That's why it's so important for each of us to disclose our conflicts of interest that we think may be there.
And you have rules on when
yes.
to disclose these conflicts
Absolutely.
of interest. Okay, yes, if you could
Yes.
share that with me
Absolutely.
as well. And that the assumption is that people are following those rules.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Powers.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wasn't sure if you were recognizing me. Well, first, I appreciate some of the questions that my colleague, Representative Rodriguez Ramos, has brought up, and I did have a few questions. I wanted to double back and thank you, though. In my first session here in the legislature, was able to pass House Bill 3435, which is made Texas Girls in STEM Day. So I want to thank you for your work in that. Also, I would have to say, though I represent out of Dallas, I am from Houston, so I do know what the space industry means to this state. That's some of the first field trips we ever took as a child were to NASA Space Center. So while I appreciate the questions that my colleague has asked, I do want to take us back to some of the things that you, Ms. Griffin, have been sharing. And I want to know, how is the Texas Space Commission working to develop the workforce needed for growing the space industry here in Texas, particularly in terms of education and training programs?
Yes, ma'am. In the statute, it does talk about workforce development, and that is an area. We have a number of grant applications that address K through 12, but also higher education as well. In fact, more than half of the applications are coming from, as I mentioned, institutes of higher education. And I also know that to date, from the applications that I have seen, many of them address the need for that skilled and talented workforce. And that really begins with the tech trades. It begins during high school or immediately following high school, and providing opportunities for people in these rural communities like Van Horn, Texas, and other locations to seek high-paying jobs and careers in the space industry. A passion of mine, speaking for myself, is helping children to see that they too can be part of the space economy if they want to be, and opening those doors and those paths for them. So I'm looking forward to having some of those K through 12, or let me say nonprofit education-based grant applications in our portal for review and hopeful awards.
Thank you. And that was, the mission of House Bill 3435, to make sure that young girls definitely knew that that employment or even careers in this industry when it comes to science, technology, engineering, and math were possible. So I'm grateful. And we just celebrated on Saturday the 6th anniversary of Texas Girls in STEM Day that the governor saw to make a state holiday.
Wonderful.
So thank you for that. Secondly, you kind of alluded to this. What metrics or key performance indicators has the Texas Space Commission established to measure its success in promoting Texas's space industry?
Could you state that one more time, because my mind was going into some of the processes?
The metrics or key performance indicators that y'all have used to establish measures and success in promoting the Texas space industry.
Yeah, so as a new entity, the SURF grant application is obviously a key focus of our time. And we were very thoughtful in putting together the form for applicants. We had 2 forms as we opened the process in mid-September, one for those public and private businesses, and then one for government entities and institutes of higher education. Because they were different, so we ended up deciding on 2 slightly different forms with many questions. In terms of key indicators for success, we're so young, we're early, we're not even a year in, that I would hate to say we've been successful. We are moving rapidly to help the speed of development and technology in that workforce for the future. So I'm not sure I can specifically answer your question today on KPIs of ultimate success.
Well, I will be, grateful for our meeting that we'll soon have. And I will say, lastly, for now, as my colleague, Mr. Curry said, you may not know, being so new right now either, but, what are the biggest challenges that y'all have faced since inception, and how are you addressing them?
I think as a new commission, bringing on the staff, creating our processes and procedures, and authorizing how we do things, and the board agreeing upon that. It's been difficult in that we can't meet as a full board outside of an open meeting, and I've learned very quickly. I'm a volunteer in this, like my fellow board members are. It takes up to 10 days to get an open meeting on the books. So I think one of the challenges is just that comes with standing up a new entity. As a small business owner, standing up a small business, you learn a lot as you get going. We have paid incredible attention to hiring the right people, like our Chief Compliance Officer and our Executive Director and others, to help us to appropriately vet and address the SURF grant applications. So that has been something, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's something that we all take, we're very serious about it. Investing taxpayer dollars in anything is not something any one of us on the board takes lightly. It's very serious business to us. So I would say our biggest challenge has just been standing up a new organization, making sure we're doing it well, making sure we're being thoughtful, efficient, yet effective in moving out. And again, as I mentioned, January is when we awarded our first grant. So we're just now what I would say moving out. The other thing that I'll add is over the summer, I spent most of my time outside of trying to run a business learning about the current space economy in Texas and visiting different companies, different entities, different nonprofits around the state to understand what they do and where they fit in this ecosystem. Because you had the benefit of growing up in Houston close to the NASA Johnson Space Center, but there's a lot happening across the state. So I took time to go learn about that and better understand what the broader needs are and how we help the economy here in Texas and create jobs for Texans, whether it's from El Paso to Brownsville to Arlington, Dallas, Fort Worth to even the Houston area, Deer Park. So I wouldn't say that's a challenge. It's been an opportunity, but something that I thought was really important as we began to shape where we were going to go.
Thank you.
Representative Curry, yeah. You have a question? A question.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a follow-up, but I wanted to kind of get back to Representative Rodriguez Ramos' comment and just kind of add a little bit to that. The way I look at this is you've got a $7.5 million grant to a SpaceX company, right? So that's been granted. The total grants so far are $69 million in January and February. So that leaves if I do the math right, you said you had $150 million to start. You've invested it. It's made $10 million, so it's about $160 million. I was just trying to clarify. That grant, granted, it's to SpaceX, which I'm obviously very fond of. They're in my district, and Kathy Luters is on the board, and she's vice chairman, I believe.
Yes, she is.
And she also runs the Boca Chica program. So she runs the Starship program in Boca Chica. So that would equate to what I see is less than 5% of the total. Am I right in my math on that? So if you take the $160 million and look at $7.5 million, it's just under 5%.
I will say I'm like several that went before me that math on the fly is not my best attribute, but yes, it's less than 20%, absolutely.
Yeah, I think because there's a lot more money to be granted as well,
That's right.
and so you're going to see more and more of those. But is your testimony that it needs to be a meaningful grant, but keep us on the map to have the data and the things that we need to share with the other industries, the other companies in the industry?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Representative Rodriguez Ramos.
Thank you. And it was 20% of individuals that are on the board, not necessarily that one company. So the collective of people making the decisions receiving 20% of the pot was what I was saying. When you look at the commission members and companies associated with members of the commission, how do you ensure that small businesses and independent innovators receive equitable access to the funding? How are you ensuring that that's happening?
Every application is looked at individually with the same attention to detail by each of the board members that's non-conflicted that will see an application. So I can tell you I've spent as much time on new startup businesses. One of the things that I'm very thoughtful to, having had a business that managed to survive for 27 years, making it out of that first decade was significant.
Yeah.
So making sure that the companies are sustainable is one of the things that we do take a close look at. But also, what is their innovation? What is their technology? How does it enable a robust space economy? How does it help grow jobs here in Texas? So it's all of those things are factored in, whether they're a one-year-old company or a 30-year-old company like mine's about to be. So each application is addressed individually with the same attention to detail as, say, a larger application or an older, more established company, a larger company.
So are there different metrics or different considerations for the smaller companies who are wanting to break into the space but essentially is being monopolized by 4 or 5 or 6 bigger giants. Are there opportunities whereby those smaller innovators will be able to have access to some of these opportunities to start?
If you're asking if there's a pocket of that 150 million
Yes.
set aside for a business under a certain amount of revenue, there is not. We look at each application based on what the technology innovation is, how it fits in one of the 5 categories that we address, and we evaluate it from there. And again, it's each board members that's not conflicted. They evaluate as they see appropriate.
It just seems to me if you have the richest men in the world who are bidding against so-and-so who is trying to get into this industry, that it'll be really difficult to really bring in new ideas and a different innovation from smaller groups of subsets of companies or businesses who want to break in. Moving on, do you all have any environmental considerations of these projects that are being proposed for these different companies and the impact that it's happening on local communities? Like, where does that, I've read many articles of the community members saying, okay, we're getting earthquakes or the water, or they're bypassing environmental regulations so that they can start these projects, and people are concerned whether it's their water, their land, quakes. Like, what are some considerations, or do you all have environmental considerations when having these conversations or granting these funding
The
requests?
statute for the Texas Space Commission does not address environmental issues. There are numerous state and federal requirements that must be met for companies involved in the space industry. So we're not a governing authority focused on environmental issues.
At all?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Tindrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I want to get some perspective, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. I'm guessing that you remember watching movies about air superiority and how were you ever in the military?
No, sir, I was not.
And how important it was for a nation to have air superiority, and how when you own the air, you actually pretty much own the warfighter's space. And I want to address some of these grants. Is it fair to say that China is trying to own the electromagnetic spectrum in space so that they can pretty much own the battle space on the entire Earth? Is that a fair assessment?
I am not an expert in electromagnetic detail, so I couldn't appropriately answer that question. What I do know is that China is advancing their technologies very rapidly.
So let me come full circle to the
Okay.
question I was getting at. I know for a fact that he or she who owns the electromagnetic spectrum in space pretty much can own the battlefield. And we don't want an adversary such as Russia, China, North Korea, those types of places to own that electromagnetic spectrum, because it is the battlefield of the 20s, 30s, and 40s that gave a nation air superiority. And so is it fair to say that when you're doing these grants, you're trying to give these grants to the companies that are large enough that can help with those military technologies that are necessary, and that some of these smaller companies might have the ability, but it might take them longer? And so when you're giving these grants, they're given to companies that can do things for warfighters and for the economy of Texas, maybe faster or more efficiently or more effectively.
I'll say the answer to that is yes, in part for efficiency and speed. Yes, and some of the more established companies that have been around a little bit longer are making those things happen. So in terms of, the grant applications, as the statute states, we are looking at civil, commercial, and military space as kind of our playing field, if you will. So the space warfighter is very much a part of that, and there's many aspects to that based on what we're learning quickly from our general officers and our friends.
So I will say this: thank you for what you're doing. I'm thankful that Texas is investing in that space, because in the next 10 to 20 years,
whoever has control of that will either keep peace or make war on Earth. And so it is huge. It's bigger than I think anyone in this room knows how important that exploration in space, the electromagnetic spectrum in space is, and having a permanent location for the United States in space to help manage all of that. So thank you. I wasn't aware until today that we actually had this.
Oh, fantastic.
I knew that Space Force was created, and I kind of know what they do, but I didn't know that this existed. So thank you for what you're doing. You're volunteering your personal time, and I'm so thankful for it.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? If not, before you take off, just so that you can give to the committee, what I wrote down is the process by which grants are given, whatever rules, compliance rules you have on how those are done, especially for conflicts of interest, and then finally, any votes or meeting minutes on how those grants were done. But
Absolutely.
do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, sir, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today. Thanks for including us in your first committee hearing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so that concludes today's testimonies from our jurisdictional agencies. We will now move on to the next topic. So next we will hear from the Governor's Small Business Freedom Council. As part of our charge, this committee is responsible for examining agency regulatory authority, oversight, and the review of existing rules. Our witnesses will provide